9. Chapter 9. Breakdown. When Dwayne Martin, on the set with me for The Inkwell, a movie where we were shooting in Wilmington, North Carolina, first mentioned that his good friend Will Smith wanted to fly in to talk to me about a role, I said, cool. I had time. I was in Wilmington, for crying out loud. He's flying in tomorrow. We didn't have many options for where to go. We were staying on the outskirts of Wilmington in the glamorous suites of the Holiday Inn. Next door, there was Hooters, yes, home to waitresses in tight t-shirts, serving pitchers of beer and carrying trays of hot wings. Our only other option was a janky, dimly lit Chinese restaurant with a southern twang, which seemed so unnatural for some reason. Will arrived in North Carolina from Atlanta, Georgia, where he was working on a project, and he, Dwayne, and I met at the Chinese restaurant. Will began by saying that he'd flown down to ask me personally if I would play his girlfriend as a series regular on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The sitcom had been a huge success for several seasons, so the answer was seemingly a no-brainer. The show was proven, but at this time, I wasn't interested in going back to television. Since Menace, a lot of movie opportunities have become available to me. As nicely as I could, I explained to Will, thanks for flying all the way here, but I don't want to do TV right now. Thank you for the opportunity. And that was that. Will was gracious and understood and left as swiftly as he had arrived. Dwayne started giving me a hard time at the restaurant and then accompanied me to my suite at the Holiday Inn. Not glamorous, but roomy, to convince me to reconsider. His concern was that Hollywood wasn't regularly turning out lead roles for black actresses. He also stressed the importance of a guaranteed income on a crossover mega-hit comedy series like Fresh Prince. It didn't have to interrupt my film career, he pointed out. You can do both TV and movies, you know, he said. I agreed, only that's not what I want to do. Despite the odds, I wanted to take my shot at being a film star, even though I had nothing slated next. That was a risk. By the same token, what if I went back to doing TV and lost my hard-won foothold as a film actress? Dwayne wasn't having it. He felt I was banking on longevity that was unrealistic. How many scripts are being written for black actresses, Jada? Don't be stupid. I can't let you turn down this kind of financial security. Get cashed up and make movies on hiatus. Although he had a point, I stayed firm. I don't want to. Dwayne was pissed and did his best to convince me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. It was a heated exchange, but I wouldn't give in, to the point that when he left my room, I slammed the door on him. Shortly after he came back, knocked, and asked in a conciliatory tone, "You want to go get a drink?" After opening the door a crack, but keeping the latch on, I called back, "No, go to Hooters by yourself." Then I slammed the door again. Discussion over, and Dwayne left it alone. My decision was sound. I believe then and now. Movies gave me the opportunity to do a variety of roles, go from project to project, and not be stuck in one role on TV, under contract, when you didn't always have a Debbie Allen to fight for you to do movies. As those other opportunities came, including films like Set It Off and A Low Down Dirty Shame, and I was climbing the ladder to leading lady, I had to learn to adapt to other challenges. As a case in point, when I was up for Jason's Lyric, my audition process lasted until the final hours before principal photography began in Houston. Up for the title role of Lyric, a dreamer who wants to get out of the life she and the other characters are stuck in, I flew in for my final in-person audition, where Doug McHenry, director, and George Jackson, producer, were deliberate. Not sure I could pull off the role because, once again, I was rough around the edges. Doug's vision was that, like the character's name, the actress who played her would have a softer essence and a quality in juxtaposition to the harsh realities of her environment. This quality was supposed to be her enchanting appeal. I was clear. I wasn't quite that. The audition was a chemistry read with the wonderful Alan Payne, the film's lead. Alan, respectful, a gentleman, and a very giving artist, made me feel welcome right away. We had a dope rapport, no question, and the readings went very well. At the end of the session, the director and producer began to confer, sending out for people from hair and makeup as I stood there, unsure what was going on. There was something not quite right about the hair on my head, I heard them say, as they discussed how to remedy that. There was also talk that I was literally hairy. My eyebrows were bushy, and my upper lip had a bit of fuzz on it. As I crossed my arms and stood under the microscope of what's wrong with Jada and her lack of pretty softness, my soon-to-be very close friend, Maxine Rennies, head of the hair department, was summoned into the room. She was tall and lovely. She reminded me of a gazelle of sorts, but less fragile, and with a sweet, cheerful voice. She looked at me and asked, thoughtfully yet confidently, "Is it okay if I touch your hair?" I nodded, and she threw her hands into the cacophony of the bushy mess. She could see that my hair had been damaged after a few films where the hairstylist didn't really know how to care for it. What I loved about Maxine from the gate was that she had an out-there sense of style. Her hair was like a medium afro of short blonde dreads. She was fly in her baby tee that showed a little tummy, a plaid pleated miniskirt, and high-heeled ankle boots with really long legs standing in them. So, when Maxine asked if she could cut my hair, it was how she asked, with such confidence, coupled with her fly style, that made me say yes. She smiled that adorable cartoon character grin of hers and said, "I have something so cute in mind for you." Judy Murdoch, who was the head of the makeup department and Maxine's close friend, was ordered to wax my brows and upper lip. After a complete makeover, I was presented to Doug and George. With that, and with poor Alan Payne advocating like hell for how perfect he thought I was for the role, Doug and George finally gave me the thumbs up. Thanks to Maxine and Judy, this movie was a turning point for me, helping me to soften those edges. Jason's Lyric was the first movie I'd done that had an explicit love scene in it, which I did not want to do. The producers had agreed up front to hire a body double, but had a very tough time finding one that was a match to me. Later, I had the same issue on Set It Off and didn't see the mismatch until the screening. The body double's juicy booty, though really, really appealing, was not my less juicy booty. I liked making movies, although the daily whiplash challenging my worth got to me. Baby, I would be constantly reminded, more than ever, how inadequate I was, while being praised at the same time. For a 20-year-old, it was confounding. It was like being on a hamster wheel, on a merry-go-round, chasing a carrot. Your performance is stunning. And about the poster for Jason's Lyric, is that your thigh showing? We're so sorry. It's too provocative, so we're taking your thigh out. Also, you're so funny. That dress makes you look like a black girl. That's not for the red carpet. Your eyes do so much acting. Black girls on the cover don't sell our magazines. I was already tired of being kissed on one cheek and backhanded on the other. It was one thing to embrace self-improvement and to adjust to standards of being a leading lady, but where did it end? How could you play the game without getting too caught up? To the point where you let the game identify you completely. I had no solutions other than swallowing my discomfort, which I was used to doing. It was a run for the roses to avoid any gnawing insecurities or discontent. They would only slow you down. Maxine, a dream seeker in the best sense, a native of Canada, had been hoping to move to LA to work on more films when we met on Jason's Lyric. After I suggested she come on out and be my roommate, she made the move in no time. Maxine would not take no for an answer when she said that she was going to throw me a 21st birthday celebration. I tried to brush her off with, "I don't want to party, Maxine. You do so much for other people and you never let anybody do anything for you. I just want to celebrate you," she whined at me in the sincerest way. Deep down, I was afraid of disappointment. What if nobody showed up? I resisted, but Max was determined. Eventually, I got to, "Fine." The biggest smile came over her face, and she hugged me so tight. "Thank you, Jada. It's going to be the best party." And she was right. She outdid herself, organizing a night at Creek Alley, a West Indian restaurant on Melrose Avenue, and oh my goodness, I couldn't believe how many people showed up. There were athletes and rappers, actors and actresses, a star-studded who's who of friends of mine or friends of friends. The restaurant was tiny, so the party spilled out onto the street corner. There were all kinds of great food, a male stripper, a full bar, dope music, and a video playing on a screen as a birthday tribute, with some very special footage, including the video of Parents Just Don't Understand that Pac and I made in high school. Everything Maxine did, putting so much time and care into this celebration, was out of love and appreciation. I was beyond touched. Nobody had ever done anything so special for my other milestone birthdays. My 16th had gone under the radar, so had my 18th, but not my 21st. Pac came through, and when he saw the video of us lip-syncing, he was not thrilled. He pulled me into a corner to ask, "Who put up that video?" "Pac, stop tripping. Ain't nobody thinking about you." I laughed, realizing, oh yeah, here I was, like his sister bringing out his baby videos. Of course, Dwayne was there, and at one point, I brushed past Will, who was leaning against the wall, and he wished me a happy birthday. "Thank you, Will." And that was that. It was a really good time had by all. Max was a little older than I was, and knew what a rite of passage turning 21 was, and she wanted me to have the gift of a magnificent memory. It's one of so many fond shared moments with her that would mean even more in the future. There was something else, however, about the high of my 21st birthday. My life was on such a promising trajectory, but the high couldn't be sustained. Highs, by nature, are fleeting. A fall was inevitable. Earthquakes are very hard to predict. Sometimes you feel tremors ahead of time, but that's not a rule. Often they come on suddenly. This is how I can best describe an otherwise uneventful day as I'm driving down Melrose Avenue. A girlfriend recognizes me driving by from her car and flags me over. I make a U-turn in the middle of the street to follow her car to the curb. I hop out and we greet each other. "How have you been? I haven't seen you in a while." She says this warmly with a gentle smile. "I know," I begin, and then realize that suddenly I'm not talking and my body is hot, really hot, and I'm starting to shake. There's a war going on inside of me. I burst into tears out of nowhere. What's happening? I'm both startled and confused. My girlfriend can see I'm in trouble. "I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on," I whine. She reaches out and tries to grab me. "Are you okay, Jada?" she asks, but I can't even answer. Turning to go, I climb back into my car and drive off. But in moments, I realize I'm too rattled to drive. When I reached the next corner, I turned onto a side street, parked, and tried to pull myself together through torrential tears and an avalanche of emotions. I felt incredibly anxious. My heart was beating out of my chest. My breath was short, and I couldn't fight off a tidal wave of sadness, a despair that was going to drown me if I didn't get control of myself. It felt like fear and relentless sorrow had sucker-punched me. When I got home to an empty house, sadness gave way to an urge I'd never experienced, that this hurt inside needed to be stopped, that it was so unbearable, the only option was to stop living. The more I tried to unthink the image of slitting my wrist, the more afraid I became that I would actually do it. For the first time ever, I didn't trust myself alone. I called my mother. Ma, I need you to come out here right away, because if you don't, I'm going to kill myself. As soon as we hung up, Mom began to make arrangements to get off work and come to Los Angeles. In the meantime, I desperately needed eyes on me that second, and Maxine was out of town working. My next call was to my homegirl, MC Light, who was also on the East Coast. Light, I need you out here. I told her that I didn't feel safe with myself. She dropped everything and was on the next plane smoking to LA. No questions asked. I was hopeless. I had never had suicidal thoughts in my life. I had never felt this level of despair. Once she got to me, Light literally brought her light into my darkness, not leaving my side for a minute of the day, not asking questions. She was such good company, keeping me grounded and distracting me from feeling unhinged. Never one to go into drama, she normalized my days, as did my dogs. Routine can be stabilizing. We'd get up, go to my favorite breakfast spot, Vivian's, and then go out with the rots. More than anything, Light was an anchor in a stormy sea, a symbol that everything was going to be okay until my mom flew in. When my mother arrived, my seams burst all over again. Mom was only a year into her sobriety then, and she had only 2 weeks to stay, during which she did the best she could to comfort me and help. After working her steps in recovery, she was in touch with how I could be affected by our history. You know, Jada, she would gently suggest, you probably have a lot of stuff to talk about with a therapist, even anger toward me. I didn't want to look at the possibility of being angry at my mother, not at that point. She then suggested we do therapy together. The prospect of opening up that entire Pandora's box with my mother was too much just then, and I knew that. But I did know that I needed help, and that prompted me to reach out to Debbie Allen, a phone call that began, I'm not doing good. I need some help, somebody to talk to. Debbie, as always, sprang into action on my behalf and arranged for me to be seen the next day by Dr. Sally Gregg, the sweetest therapist who, without a doubt, saved my life. After my first session with her, she requested that I see a psychiatrist so I could be prescribed some meds. The psychiatrist diagnosed me as clinically depressed and put me on Prozac. I resisted. I protested to Dr. Gregg. I don't want to be on medication like I'm crazy or something. Jada, this medication is simply to help get your head out of the gray clouds so you can actually deal with your issues that are coming up for you. This won't be forever, and you are not crazy. After a beat, Dr. Gregg reassured me. A lot of people get a little assistance to help relieve overbearing depression. She had such a warm maternal nature, and I believed and felt her sincerity. I relinquished my resistance when we agreed to the plan that once I'd stabilized, I would get off the Prozac, pronto. The process took longer than expected. Once I began the medication, I was not happy that it killed my libido. That wasn't going to work for me for a long period of time. Sex was the one great thing going on in my life. However, as Dr. Gregg promised, the meds helped me get my head above the gray clouds, and therapy helped me begin a journey of emotional healing. Now, at least I could see where the wounds came from, then slowly begin the daunting work of forgiveness and acceptance. In my early passages of healing, I was ready to be done with Hollywood and bought a farmhouse outside of Baltimore. It required a lot of renovation, but the plan was for me to move back home. This way, I could fly to LA or go to New York for auditions. but I no longer wanted to be in the Hollywood mix. I needed some peace. I needed some quiet. I needed to breathe. Even running is part of the process. It is only human to do so, but not for long and not forever. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype. One of my favorite observations offered up by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, one of my longtime mentors on the page, is the understanding that running is part of our human experience and can lead us both astray and back to ourselves. Fight or flight is wired into our DNA. Even while in flight, I was aware that something was welling up in me that needed to be examined. An unimaginable pain threatened to consume me. And my fear was that if I gave it more attention, it would make good on its threat. And sometimes that's exactly what happened, but not for long. Once we stand our ground and face the source of the pain, it can't kill us. The more we ignore our hurts, the more we run, the more power we give them. This takes us out, and for some of us, to our grave. Often our pain is simply a communication encouraging us to ask for help. With the belief that we can be helped, it's easier to recognize that our state of desperation is our wound screaming, "Heal me." When we cease to fear our wounds and cover them in love, they begin to heal and eventually transform into a flower, a prince, a queen, a gift. But we can't do it alone, and we are not meant to. If you can have the courage to believe it's okay to cry to the universe for help instead of, "Why me?" a door will open and a healing in some form will come. For those who struggle with suicidal thoughts, I pray you come to understand that you are worthy of your healing. One day at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 second at a time. Hold on, have faith, get help. Find someone trained to guide souls through the dark hours and to remind us that our suffering is not meant to take our lives, but instead can lead us to the life we deserve. Today, give yourself the gift of choosing to look at a wound you may have been running from. Can you see what it might be trying to tell you? Can you accept that you are worth the help you may need? Chapter 10. Trying to Find My Footing. The main appeal of the farmhouse I bought on the outskirts of Baltimore was that it was old world tiny, with a charming hearth in the kitchen and a small pond off the deck, and it all sat on a large expanse of land. The views from the farmhouse windows were beautiful, and I was sure they would prove to be in every season. Once I made my new home habitable, I planned to fill it with a menagerie of rescued dogs and cats, maybe even a horse for my mom, fulfilling a childhood dream of hers. Even though I intended to move into the farmhouse as my main residence, that couldn't happen right away, so I remained in LA while overseeing the renovations, making short, frequent visits. Whenever I came back to the East Coast, being close to family helped me find my bearings and made me feel grounded. Funny enough, life in Baltimore felt a little simpler and a little slower than it once had. Whenever I stayed with my mom, now deeply committed to her recovery and living in Columbia, Maryland, in a new solid relationship with Paul Jones, soon to be her third husband, I found a level of security that I had not felt under her roof for quite some time, if ever. The fact that Adrian was living in the suburbs helped relieve my growing anxiety over the potential of being kidnapped and held for ransom. Part of this was PTSD from the violence I had already survived. Part of it was the reality that kidnapping was becoming a new hustle in Baltimore. And now that I was a recognizable budding star, people would assume that I was a profitable target. I moved a lot more cautiously because I didn't want to end up duct taped in the trunk of a car. And unfortunately, I knew people that had happened to, and people who were doing it. My solution was to be extra vigilant. During this period, while on Prozac, I resolved to stop drinking or using any mind-altering substances, to avoid dating, and to concentrate on getting my shit together. This was the best way I knew to get well and find my footing again. With the exception of Light, none of my friends in Baltimore or LA were aware of my breakdown. Nobody really suspected that there was something seriously amiss. Although Dwayne Martin suggested I was becoming a hermit after I turned down invitations to get together. He finally called me up one evening to say, "Come out, we're right down the street." He and his girlfriend at the time, Tisha Campbell, were at the Baked Potato, a lounge-like spot on Ventura Boulevard. As an afterthought, Dwayne added that Will Smith might join us when he finished work for the night. I couldn't tell Dwayne no, because I could literally walk to the Baked Potato from where I lived, probably why he chose it. Saying no felt disrespectful. When I got there, under duress, I didn't plan to stay long. And then Will, charming and cheerful, as usual, joined us. Shortly after his arrival, it became too loud to have much of a conversation. Someone suggested, "What about Jerry's Deli?" We all agreed that that was a good idea and bounced. The next thing I knew, the four of us were up the road on Ventura Boulevard at Jerry's, a popular spot that stayed open late. Will was not at all the goofy guy I'd suspected him of being. He was a gifted conversationalist, highly intelligent, well-read, and contagiously passionate about a wide range of interests. He went from the likes of Plato to Z3MCs, old school hip-hop, to politics, and to taking over the table with his dynamic storytelling. He was funny, too, and seemingly had a level of stability that was refreshing. He had an expansive vision, not just for his career, although he made no apologies about his drive to one day be the biggest movie star in the world and to take hold of all that life had to offer. My thought at the time was, Will Smith is actually intriguing and captivating. Who knew? A few weeks later, my mobile phone rang during one of my visits to Baltimore, as I was walking along with my mom at a mall in Columbia. As soon as I pressed the button to take the call, I'd barely said, "Hello?" when the caller identified himself as Will Smith. Although I considered him just a friend at this point, I did perk up when I heard his voice. My mother immediately asked, "Who is that?" "Hold on," I said to Will, put my hand over the speaker, and turned to my mother saying quietly, "It's Will Smith." She gave me a disapproving look. "What does he want?" "We're friends." Adrian got a look in her eye that showed up on the important occasions when she did not intend to be misunderstood. "What is Will Smith doing calling you?" "He's married." True. Will had married Cherie Zampino, and the two had a son, Trey, together. Before I could repeat myself, my mother insisted, "You don't need to be friends with a married man. Hang up the phone and tell him not to call you anymore." My mother was right. I had perked up a little too much when I heard his voice, and Mom could tell this interaction was not appropriate. I told Will somewhat sheepishly, "My mom doesn't think I should be talking to you since you are married, and she said you shouldn't call me anymore." Will understood, relayed that he meant no disrespect, and abided by the rules as set forth by Adrian. With that, we said goodbye and wished each other well. Almost a year went by before I heard from him again. Professionally, I barely skipped a beat. The survivor in me knew better than to give any notice of my troubles so that I was not deemed unreliable for work. In 1994, on any given week, I was on a merry-go-round, either doing publicity for a crop of films released that year or in the middle of shooting other projects, or putting in hours for another batch in pre or post-production. One night, I might be in Washington, D.C. at the premiere of A Low Down Dirty Shame, which was memorable because I invited Ropsel and he showed up in a red leather suit, as esoteric and stylish as ever. And the next day I was flying back to L.A. for fittings on Demon Night, directed by Ernest Dickerson and executive produced by Joel Silver as part of Tales from the Crypt. It was my good fortune, I felt, to have avoided getting typecast and to go deep into character development and motivation in drama and in comedy. During pre-production for A Low Down Dirty Shame, I had the opportunity to train with a fight instructor for my role of Peaches, to make it believable that I could physically kick a grown man's ass. As usual, I went all in and seriously thought, I really like fighting. Maybe I should go pro. Many folks, including Keenan, reminded me that no one was interested in hiring an actress with no teeth. Instead, I looked for other ways to expand my repertoire and to explore other avenues, like getting into directing music videos. After finding an agency willing to rep me as a video director, I was fortunate to connect with R&B crooner Gerald Levert, who was a sweetheart. When he wanted me to star in his video for How Many Times, I made him an offer. I'll be in your video if you let me direct it. Once we had it filmed and edited and aired, the requests started to come in. Getting behind the camera and coming up with the concept for the video showed me that my creativity was not limited to being in front of the camera. Suddenly, I had a juggling act with acting and directing, so I had to be conscious about how I chose to use my time, professionally and socially. But sometimes the two came together. Out of the blue one day, I got a call that none other than Prince wanted to speak with me about a creative endeavor, a ballet opera he had written and recorded. He had seen some of my films and was reaching out to discuss possible collaboration. Prince? As in my lifelong inspiration and one of my favorite artists ever? Whose music had inspired me to get my first job so that I could afford to buy his records? As in the creator whose songs and looks I had impersonated in costume and lip sync contests? This was crazy. Within days, the meeting was set at my house, and I was still in a state of disbelief when I opened the door. There he was, dressed all in white, wearing a warm smile, as I ushered him into my living room and pulled out my photo albums to prove that I was a serious devotee. It didn't even occur to me that Prince would be embarrassed by my behavior, because I was so excited to show him those photos. Needless to say, he was subtly horrified. There was no likeness, which made me love him more. What began as his interest in possibly collaborating on some project ideas soon turned into a beautiful, lasting friendship, and shifted as well into his generosity to me as a mentor. While he helped me find my footing, Prince was also trying to find his, in a sense, in his battle with his label, Warner Brothers Records, for autonomy over his artistry. He was single-minded in spreading the message to other creatives about not allowing the industry to exploit your art for their profit. A constant theme in our conversations was his desire to retrieve the masters to his music, to own his art, as well as his name. I admired his determination beyond measure, how powerfully expressive he was, and what he was willing to risk in order to take on the powers that be. But Prince also loved to have a good time, and had the most potent sense of humor, along with a sprinkle of hood magic, in contrast to his dandy-esque ways. Prince was one of the first artists I witnessed taking over a whole movie screen one night. We entered through the back exit, and as we were walking along, I must have been pressing my point about something as per usual. Suddenly, he gave me a look. All 5 feet and something of him, barely taller than me, even in his heels, in the middle of my oratory, and without warning, he swooped me over his shoulder like a weightless sack. Pleasantly shocked, I started to protest. Who knew he was so strong in those heels? What you gonna do now, huh? He said, laughing. All I could do was say in a schoolgirl voice, "Oh my God, put me down." Child, I clutched my pearls because Prince was a whole lot of man, heels and all, and a reminder to me to slow your roll, little girl. When he seemed to come out of nowhere to befriend me, I was reassured by his kindness, his respect, and the value he placed on my talent. He offered me knowledge, understanding, and support that I really needed at that time in my life. Although I wasn't up for a serious involvement, by the fall of 1994, I felt ready to end my sabbatical from dudes. Then I got a phone call that piqued my interest. In this era, Hollywood introductions were often made through publicists and managers. That's how I agreed to go out with a gentleman. We'll call him Lance. I obliged the request because, why not? From our first meeting, Lance seemed very focused on locking me down. He came with gifts, trips, and compliments galore, accompanied by the declaration of his desire to have a child with me. This guy hardly knew me, and though I made it clear that I was not interested at all in a serious relationship, he persisted. He wasn't hearing me, to the point where he asked me next to meet the child he already had. I politely told him, "It's too soon, and we really don't know where this is going. We should wait on that." Then he went all out, thinking I would bite, and offered to pay close to $700,000 toward the renovation of my farmhouse in Maryland. Yes, it was an expensive job, and it was tempting. But long ago I'd learned nothing is for free. His gesture didn't feel like generosity. It felt like a way to entrap me. When I declined his gift, and he got very upset, my mother pulled me up, declaring, I don't like him, Jada. Something is off about him." I thought her level of concern was excessive, and as naive young daughters do, I pooh-poohed my mother's reaction. But there was a gnawing feeling inside of me that knew Mommy was right. He had shown signs of being easily agitated and sometimes having difficulty calming down when he didn't get his way. Being young, my attitude was, why not give the dude a chance in case I'm missing something? There was a sweetness to him, and I gotta admit, all that attention, especially after my breakdown, made me feel desirable again. So I rationalized. Maybe he's just an extremely generous person and excited about the possibility of us as a couple. Lance lived out of state, and I'd visited him a couple of times and enjoyed myself. For that reason, shortly after Thanksgiving, when Lance invited me to fly back with him to his home, I accepted his invitation, letting him know I can't stay long. I had been at Lance's for no more than 2 days when a series of calls in the early morning of November 30th came through, and I needed to leave for New York. At approximately 12:30 a.m. that day, Pac had been ambushed and shot outside of Quad Recording Studios near Times Square. He had been struck 5 times and rushed into surgery at Bellevue for his most serious wound, a gunshot to the groin. The reports I got from Afeni, Pac's mom, were encouraging. Pac had survived, and we didn't have to worry about whether he would live or die. The concern, though, was that Pac was due in court the following day, December 1st, in an ongoing sexual assault case stemming from an incident in November 1993. When Pac had first attempted to explain to me the basis for the accusation, I had been visiting him in New York. We were in his hotel room, talking about his new project for Interscope Records, Me Against the World. I was really excited about the album and happy for him. Then as the conversation turned to his latest legal concerns, Pac looked at me with sincere intensity and said, "I need to explain to you what happened, how I caught this case." He didn't get very far into the story before I stopped him, holding up my hand, looking at him with the same intensity. "Listen, I don't need to hear the details. All I know is that if Tupac Amaru Shakur is ever in a room with any girl under any circumstance, she should always feel safe, no matter what. I braced myself for an intense rebuttal. Not that he disagreed with that belief, but because you never knew which Pac was showing up on any given day. He could be combative, depending on his mood and whether he gave a fuck about your opinion. But on this occasion, he sat down in a chair across from me in silence. Something in Pac was shifting. His energy was filled with more humility and openness than I had seen in a minute. We sat there in the quiet for a long time, and I remember thinking that once everything was over, he was going to move very differently. His world had been going way too fast, and he had gotten off track. I saw this as a sobering moment for him. Throughout the legal proceedings, Pac would maintain that he did not commit the alleged abuse, but did take responsibility for not having stopped the others who did. The shooting and robbery outside Quad Studios on the eve of his court appearance added one more layer of chaos. Rather than being a random robbery of more than $40,000 of cash and jewelry, it seemed that the hit had been planned. We didn't know whom to trust or what to believe. Before I got off the phone with Afeni, she simply said, "When are you getting here?" I gave Lance the short version. "I need to go to New York. Pac's been shot." He was not happy. As I started to make arrangements, he said, "So you gonna leave me to go see some other nigga?" Here we go. In my romantic relationships, I had often been haunted by layers of misunderstanding regarding my relationship with Pac. So I could be patient with Lance's discomfort, but the way he reacted didn't score him any points with me. "That nigga happens to be one of my best friends," I said, calm but flustered. Even though I knew Pac was out of surgery at Bellevue, looming questions were who had ambushed him and why and how to help plan for his safety. The first line of business was to get Pac through his court day and then get him to an undisclosed spot where he could recuperate. I didn't have time for Lance's insecurities, but Lance wouldn't stop. "Yeah, right, your friend." I placated him, promising, "I'll be back when I can." From there, I shut him out. I had no more appeasing left in me. The trip to New York was surreal. When I arrived at the courthouse, Pac was in a dingy hallway, accompanied by Afeni and several other people awaiting his hearing. I will never forget my first vision of Tupac after that attack, bandaged up and in a wheelchair. I'd never seen him so vulnerable. There was nothing I could do or say to make it all better. He was in pain while dealing with an intense court case on top of a very serious attempt on his life, along with the media circus. All I wanted to do was hug him, and I couldn't. Everything was chaotic, and he was dead certain that somebody was really trying to kill him. The first suggestion was for Pac to come out and stay at my house, but Afeni and I reasoned that if anyone was trying to find him, my place would definitely be a top contender for where to look. Jasmine Guy had flown in once she heard the news. As she and I were tight, she and Pac had become close friends. Afeni and I thought about Jasmine's house as a safe place in LA for Pac to recuperate, because very few knew of their friendship. And Jazz, without a doubt, was a stone-cold ride or die. Jazz and I had lunch that day and talked about Pac's situation, but Afeni called her personally to request that Pac stay with her. Without hesitation, Jazz said yes. It was decided I should keep my distance until we knew exactly what was going on. In the courthouse hallway, Pac and I said our goodbyes without knowing when we would see each other again. Everybody had their marching orders. A part of me felt absolutely useless. That hurt, but it was best for now. So I decided to go back to Lance's house. At least I'd be distracted. But distraction was hard to achieve, as I was in constant contact with Jasmine and Pac. I'm sure that gnawed at Lance. A couple of days went by. Nothing major happened, although I received another very important phone call. I just didn't realize its significance at the time. The call was from Spike Lee, who was interested in me for a script of his called Girl 6. Spike jumped on the phone and talked about the project, and he left it with, "I'll send you the script, see what you think, and then we should meet." Even though I didn't think that particular project was right for me, I was excited to be on Spike's radar. Later, when I told Lance about the call, he wasn't interested. The next night, Lance took me and a friend of his to dinner. Everything seemed to be relatively calm and on par. I remember looking out the window on our drive home and paying attention to landmarks that had become familiar by now. Given my new fear of being kidnapped and my need for having an escape plan on deck, I had developed this habit whenever I was in a new environment. We were a mere 3 minutes from Lance's house when, all of a sudden, a minor dispute between us erupted into an explosive reaction from him. His intensity never really felt safe, so as usual, my reaction was to try to stay level-headed. But the calmer I stayed, the angrier and louder he became, and the more his friend in the back tried to intervene, saying, "Hey man, just calm down," in a respectful way. That only threw more gas on Lance's fire. The madder he became, the more I realized this was not going to end well. Besides, this dude was huge, all muscle, and apparently out of control. He had been drinking, and when he slammed his fist on that dashboard, I feared I could be next. My heart thumped, and I instantly scanned the environment outside the car, pinpointing exactly where we were and how far we were from his house. My assessment came just as Lance slammed on the brakes and turned as if to hit me. At that instant, I threw the car door open and jumped out in my flat sandals and skirt and made it across the street, cutting through some backyards to get to the house before he did. I knew he kept his back sliding door open, and I dashed into the house from his backyard, veered into the bedroom, where I quickly grabbed my black Russell sweats and my sneakers, and then raced into the kitchen, where I grabbed the biggest knife he had before running into his child's empty bedroom to hide. As I change into my sweats, I go over my options. It's late. I know no one in the area, and there is no leaving safely. I have to make it till the morning, till I can get on the first plane out of here. Before I can finish tying my sneakers, Lance's voice bellows through the house, and he comes through the sliding back door. "Jada, where the fuck are you?" He continues to yell for me as I realize, fuck. I'm stuck in a small room with only walls around me, no doors or windows, trapped. If he finds me, as huge and amped as he is, I'm done. I have no escape, no advantage, even with a knife. I feel panic rise in me, but instead of going there, I find enough anger inside to move. I make a choice to try to gun it for the front door. The second I step into the hall, Lance comes out of his bedroom at the far end of the hall opposite from me. We are in a standoff. Lance starts to walk swiftly toward me until I draw the huge knife and hold it out in front of me. "Don't come any closer." My voice is low and full of fear, yet I'm determined to protect myself by any means necessary. I swear to God. Lance stops in his tracks. But then, in a sweet fucking Jekyll and Hyde way, offers a line I have heard only in movies. "You think I would hurt you?" My heart drops. I know neither of us is going to get out of this one unscathed. He begins to creep toward me, as if to persuade me that I'm safe, which I know is not the case. Just then, thank goodness, Lance's friend comes into the house through the front door and right away tries to de-escalate the confrontation. His friend calms everything down enough for Lance to apologize for how far everything has gone. Thinking fast, I respond by playing along, accepting his apology and agreeing. "Of course, I understand. I know you didn't mean it. Everything's fine." And so on. As soon as all seemed smooth, I managed to secretly call my assistant and asked her to get me on a plane to LA first thing the next morning. Lance saw me packing and asked, "Where are you going?" Remember I told you about my call with Spike? He wants to meet with me tomorrow in LA, but I'll come back after. Lance knew something was up, but let it go for the night. Partly because I'd mentioned Spike earlier. When the car came to pick me up the next morning, Lance said, "I'm never going to see you again, am I?" I put on my brightest, most forgiving smile and said, "Of course you will. I'll call you after my meeting." I got on that plane, holding my breath, thankful the lie had worked. I never saw Lance again. Alone, that is. The most potent love language for me has always been the language of protection. It has always been important for me to feel protected by those I love and to be able to protect them in return. You show up for each other, even when doing so comes at a cost. This was one of many thoughts running through my head when I made the first of a series of visits to Pac while he was incarcerated. This visit was to Rikers Island, where he was locked up in January 1995, first in the infirmary wing, while awaiting his sentence. Originally, he wasn't required to turn himself in, but a judge ordered him held after he wasn't able to post bond for the $3 million bail. When we'd all stood in the dark hallway of that courthouse on December 1st, 1994, the day he was convicted of sexual abuse, the other allegations were dropped. I'd never imagined he would end up in Rikers, one of the most brutal, dangerous prisons in our country. Given my years of visiting incarcerated friends and working with young people in juvenile detention, I was no stranger to the inside of correctional facilities, and yet nothing really prepares you for a visit to Rikers. To get there, I drove first to a parking lot where I boarded a bus which took passengers over a bridge to the actual island. Crossing that bridge was nerve-wracking. I took deep breaths, trying not to focus on the fact that I was about to enter a notorious prison on an island without any means of escape. I was at the mercy of Rikers. As I looked down at the murky cold waters of the East River, a riptide of anxiety began to set in at the prospect of seeing Pac imprisoned. My challenge was to swallow all my many fears and put on my best face for what was to come. When I arrived at the prison itself, I felt as if we had reverted to the Middle Ages. Everything appeared dungeon-like, dark and dank, accompanied by horrid sounds of gates slamming and bars clanging as I entered one section, then creaking open in front of me as I moved to the next. At various checkpoints, there were faceless uniformed guards who searched my belongings and asked questions and patted me down thoroughly, and even a drug-sniffing German shepherd who gave me the once-over. This is a demeaning process that makes you feel you've surrendered yourself to do time. Not every prison gives you these feels, but at Rikers, the vibe was that one wrong move would get me thrown in a cell too, except when some of the guards quietly asked for an autograph in between their moments of cold control. Finally, I was led to a room with a small round table where I waited for my one-on-one with Pac, while a prison guard kept eyes on me through a glass window. Soon the main door opened, and I watched as Pac, dressed in a brown prison uniform that looked like scrubs, completely shackled, shuffled into the room with a guard. The moment I laid eyes on his face, my heart sank. As the guard unshackled Pac, I tried to maintain composure so he wouldn't know how shocked I was by his appearance. Pac was thinner than I'd ever seen him. Patches of his hair were missing all over his head, a pattern of his alopecia that started earlier after he was beaten by police in Oakland. In his heightened level of stress and sadness, he was not himself in any way, shape, or form. For the first time in years, he was having to deal with harsh realities. Without weed or alcohol, no mind-altering assistance was there as he sobered up and awakened to a very brittle circumstance. As soon as he approached and I was given a nod by a nearby guard, I hugged him hard, holding on to him for as long as I was allowed. He seemed so frail. Among my first words to him were, "I've been talking to your lawyer, Pac. We're gonna get you out of here." We sat down across from each other. Pac paused for a beat. "I can't ask you to help bail me out. You've worked so hard to get where you are. I couldn't ask you that, and because I love you, I wouldn't ask you that." Pac spoke with the deepest sincerity. But for me, the idea of not helping them get out was unacceptable. Pac was a young artist steeped in legal bills, on top of a great many people counting on him to support them. I knew that $3 million for bail would not be easy for him to come by. He needed help, and there was a group of us offering to step in, including some other female friends and women in his life. But Pac resisted. His refusal to have me raise money for his bail was more than pride, which I only came to see during that visit. Considering the nature of his charge, it was unfathomable and unbearable to him that any woman should have to shoulder his problems. And in his view, as there were men in entertainment making millions off his talents, it made sense to count on them. I pushed back, as I always did, and continued discussing how we should strategize about his bail. "Jada," he interrupted, "listen to me. All I need you to do is make sure my mother is straight. Take care of her bills for me while I'm in here. Can you do that?" I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. My tears would be worse than bullets at this point. "No problem. Whatever you need, Pac." It seemed he had surrendered to something that I was not yet willing to accept: his fate. All he was asking me to do was assist him in taking care of what he needed most, not what I thought he needed. I wanted to be both a good friend and a good soldier who could follow his lead. That would ultimately be a very trying task. Again, because of the nature of the charges, Pac wanted me to keep my distance. What he didn't realize was that I had already been pulled in. Calls had come in from women's groups led by prominent black women who requested that I disassociate myself from Tupac. But he was my brother. I wasn't going to abandon him, though I knew it would cost me one way or another. Toward the end of our visit, we did our best to make small talk and add some levity, but it wasn't possible. It was a devastating day. It became even more soul-crushing when the guards took him away, and it hit me. I'm leaving him here, and there is nothing I can do. I couldn't believe it. As I crossed that bridge in that stupid bus, a tidal wave of guilt came rushing in with the thought, what kind of friend am I that I get to go home and he doesn't? From the moment Pac landed in Rikers, we were in close communication, either on the phone or in a volume of letters, and he didn't hold back from giving me the blow-by-blow. One of the very first letters, written at 2 a.m., described how he spent his days trying to drain out the shouts of power of the guards and attempting to ignore the diabolical laughs of hollow men happy to be incarcerated. He compared himself to a bird without wings, unable to fly to freedom, and to a fish far from the sea, unable to breathe. I would do my best to be home at certain hours to receive his phone calls. My schedule was hectic, but we figured out how to talk often. We were still holding out hope that his appeal would land him a reprieve, and he wouldn't have to serve out his sentence. He was looking at anywhere from 2 years to 7. The legal bills were mounting, and a couple of times I took care of some of them to keep the ship moving. Thankfully, he didn't protest, but I treaded lightly. Then I received a letter from Pac, dated February 2nd/3rd, that took me by complete surprise. It was addressed to J.K. Shakur, as in Jada Karen, with Pac's last name. I opened the envelope and read through the letter slowly. Pac began by saying that he realized we had not been romantic in the past, but that he was at a place where he believed the two of us were meant to be husband and wife. He wrote to say that when he was in struggle, others claimed to love him, but only you loved me. Then when he blew up, everybody swore they loved me, but in his view, only I did. And he continued, now as I have slipped from grace and the world has turned against me, a few claim to have love for me, but once again you show me your love. After deep reflection and spiritual awakening, I've come to realize the friend, lover, and soulmate was there all the time. I've not seen or felt from anywhere or anyone the intensity and loyalty that you have shown me. That was why, he concluded, I want to commit myself to you. That was why, he repeated, I want to marry you. The last thing I ever expected was a formal marriage proposal from Tupac. He asked me to answer as soon as possible because his entire existence depended on me saying yes. Pac had a way with words that could paint the most idyllic picture of his heart. I knew we had deep love for each other, but not in a husband and wife sense. I was so torn. I knew what this was. He needed solid footing. I had been that for him through so much, but what he really needed was someone to do time with him. And I had planned on doing so, as a friend, as a loving, devoted, ride-or-die friend. But as his wife? Pac called my mother and formally asked for my hand in marriage. Pac had his old-fashioned ways, especially when it came to certain traditional values. He believed in family and loyalty, and he loved children. I had never dreamed of getting married. In fact, I had no intention of ever doing so, to anyone. Even so, one thing I knew about Pac was that he would eventually be married and a devoted father. Mommy loved Pac too, but she did not think that we should get married. She told Pac that if this was something we really wanted, we should wait to see how things panned out with his case before we made any kind of commitment. When I talked to Afeni about Pac's marriage proposal, she was very diplomatic. I want you guys to do what makes you happy. Everyone was a bit shocked by this turn of events, but none of them had seen Pac at Rikers. I had, and I knew what Pac was feeling. Still, I couldn't let go of the strong sense that the two of us as husband and wife would be a recipe for disaster. In my uncertainty, I played with the possibility. That is, until I asked Pac, do you expect me to come there for conjugal visits? His answer was yes. This was when reality hit hard. Pac was expecting me to be not just a psychological wife, but a physical wife. I couldn't do it. It took some difficult conversations, but eventually, Pac and I got to a place of acceptance. Here is what I knew. Pac wanted me as a wife to get him through his jail sentence, but not for a lifetime. He didn't know that then, not while he was behind bars, but I promise you, once he got out of jail, he was glad he didn't marry me. On February 8th, Pac was sentenced in court to serve from 18 months to 4.5 years. The New York Times reported that he tearfully apologized to his victim while protesting that he was not guilty of the crime. A short time later, around Valentine's Day, 1995, Pac was transferred upstate to the maximum security penitentiary in Dannemora, New York. None of us could believe it. In Tupac's words, Dannemora was where they send you if you were to kill somebody or if you blew up the World Trade Center. 2 years earlier, in fact, terrorists had attempted to blow up the World Trade Center, only to come back to finish the job in 2001. Where did they put those terrorists? Dannemora. That's where Pac was. On that same Valentine's Day of Pac's sentencing, the other big news, at least in the entertainment world, was that divorce papers had been filed in the dissolution of the marriage of Will Smith and his wife Cherie. Before the week was out, my phone rang while I was over at my Aunt Karen's house. A seduction began the moment I answered the phone. It was Will, cheerful, smiling audibly as he asked, "What's up? Where are you?" "Baltimore," I told him, smiling audibly in return. I told him about the farmhouse I bought, and I was renovating. He didn't waste much more chit-chat before asking, "You seeing anybody?" I paused. What else was there to say but, no? "Good," Will said. "You seeing me now." Oh, I thought, that's a bold approach. And nobody had ever stepped to me like that. My reaction was a schoolgirl laugh. Bold done right is sexy. "Hit me up when you get back to LA. All right, I said defenseless. And I bit, hook, line, and sinker. Naturally, we will make mistakes and fail from time to time. That's part of being fully alive. There are no guarantees. If we are waiting for guaranteed courses of action, we may spend much of our life waiting. Melody Beattie, The Language of Letting Go. Sometimes on our journey, we lose our footing. This is an unavoidable occurrence, but too often, our mistakes or confusion can paralyze us and put us in states where we no longer trust ourselves. We can become so fearful that we render ourselves stagnant. There are certain times that require us to be still, but there are also moments when it's important to keep moving. We must remain in touch with our willingness to continue trying to find our way, to find our footing. Knowledge and wisdom come from embracing all the lessons life has to offer. Your steps are not always meant to be perfect, although so many will try to shame you into believing so. There are times we will step in shit, learn from it, and then there are times we will step into a gold mine, celebrate it. Either way, life is about taking risks and stepping out on faith. And no matter what, the path you need will find you. Do something today to change it up. Drive an unexplored route home. Extend yourself to make a new friend. Learn something that inspires you to get out of your comfort zone. And have fun finding your footing along the way.